Episode number 204.
Hello, you're listening to the Career Changemaker podcast. Having the courage to leave a career that you have worked hard to build and try something else can be tough. So in each episode, we dive into key career change strategies so that you have a clear understanding of what is required to transition into a new role or a new industry without feeling like you have to start at the bottom or have to take a massive pay cut, because ain't nobody got time for that. If you are ready for frank and honest discussions about how to become a career change maker, keep listening. I'm your host, lawyer turned career strategist and executive coach, Janine Esbrand. Okay, so Jazz, I am super excited for you to join us today for this live recording. So this is going to be an interactive discussion that we're going to be having about imposter syndrome, and I'm super excited. So Jazz, let's first start off by you introducing yourself and telling everyone a bit about you, and I'll do the same.
Amazing. So my name is Jaz M. I'm a coach for ambitious careers and communities. I've been doing this for 5 years now. I'm passionate about working with high achievers to really just lift the limits off of our careers, to avoid burnout, overwhelm, and underwhelm. As bizarre as that might sound, it's a thing. It's a thing that we try to avoid within our careers. And I do that through working with folks one-to-one, workshops. I also have a podcast, having lots of conversations like this, like any way possible to get the message out that we should embrace ambition and we should go for the things that we want.
Yay! I love it. And if you're joining and you don't know who I am, I'm Janine Esbrand. I'm a career strategist and an executive coach, and I'm really passionate about helping women to transition into where they need to be in their careers to make the most impact, to find the most meaning, and just really love the work that they're doing. And Jazz, you and I met a while ago now in a community. Shout out for communities. Like, it's so important to get surrounded by like-minded people. And I loved what you had to say when we met, and I invited you to join us for our live event, which was in September. Yeah. So we had Career Changemakers Live, which was an awesome event that was really focused on helping people to figure out how to be the CEOs of their careers. And one of the things you talked about at the event was imposter syndrome. And the things that you shared was a really fresh perspective on the topic, and the way that you talked about how people can go about tackling it or managing it was a little different. So I'm excited for you to share that with everybody today. But before we do that, shall we first just address what is imposter syndrome? I feel like most people will know what it is, but there may be someone on here who's just what does it actually mean? So let's talk about that. How would you define it, Jazz?
So it's a multi-sensory experience, because if you're anything like me, it hit me before I realized what it was. Dictionary definition, it is this experience of not believing you're as competent as others perceive you to be, which essentially means that you're worrying about what you think other people think, right? Keyword, thoughts, right? It's a lot to do with our perception, but also is a lot to do with other people, like how we're interacting with other people. And ultimately, that's how it very easily gets connected to us having those feelings of quote unquote being found out, having feelings of never quite being good enough, having feelings of getting stuck in this loop of not quite ready yet, need to dot the I's, don't have all the things. There's so many different ways that it actually manifests, but all of it ties back to this perception that you are not as competent as others are perceiving you to be.
I love that. That is such a succinct way to put it. And it's so common though, right? Amongst women, it's so common. Amongst women of color, it's so common. I was doing some research and I came across an article that was talking about a report that was done last year by KPMG. And it said that 75% of female executives have experienced imposter syndrome in their career. And that number is higher for women of color.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Huge. It's huge. And it's going to sound like a very sad thing to say, but it's also not surprising to me. One of the things that we tend to overlook when we talk about imposter syndrome is understanding how much our environment plays into it. And for many of us, especially at an executive level, we're operating in an environment that wasn't necessarily made for us. Before we hit record, the sun was blocking the view of my face. I positioned my afro to cover it. Do you think whoever created workplaces however many decades ago anticipated somebody showing up professionally with an afro? Not so much, right? And I use that as a very casual example of really just encouraging us to look at the ways in which the perception is always going to be a little bit skewed. If you are in a relationship where leadership don't understand your communication style, if you're in an environment where they're not necessarily adaptable and flexible to parenthood or to being the primary caregiver or breadwinner within not only your nuclear family, but you're the eldest child. And these are things that a lot of communities of color relate to, right? The way that we operate can feel very different. So we lift ourselves into these different environments and we wonder why we feel different. We wonder why what we see as performing might not be what my manager thinks, and I'm not sure. And I think doing a check on your environment can be one of the biggest things that you can do when you feel like you're experiencing imposter syndrome, because there are certain things that can foster it in a negative way. And there are certain things that can make it harder for imposter syndrome to arise. Case in point, it's about you not thinking you're as competent as others perceive you to be. If you have a positive relationship with your manager, you can ask. You can feel safe to ask, how do you think I'm performing? If there's a culture of feedback, you can request that feedback from people on projects and say, how do you think I showed up in this project? What would be even better if? Even those phrases can be missing from complete environments, right? People don't realize feedback is a skill, it's a discipline. There's a good way to do it and a harmful way to do it, if we're honest. And if we're not able to have those candid conversations, I'm never going to know if I feel like I measure up. And I might just assume that I don't.
Yes.
Imposter syndrome.
Yes. And I think that piece around assumptions is huge. I encourage people to base things on data, because those assumptions, they could be running wild in your mind. It's like, oh, they looked at me this way, so it must mean this, or they didn't say anything when I sent the report, so it must mean this. It's like, well, do you know though? Can we actually get the information? Can we know what you're thinking to be true? And if we can't, how do we get the data? And I think so often we shy away from getting the data for fear that it's going to be negative, but the reality is you're thinking negatively already. Yeah, it's huge. And I think it's something that actually is top of mind. A lot of the clients that I'm working with this year is this element of entitlement. And we usually have a negative stigma that goes around entitlement. But I think especially for women, marginalized groups, people of color, we have to step into that sense of, I'm entitled to knowing your feedback on a project. I'm entitled to know if I'm performing in line with expectations. I'm entitled to disagree, right? If you've invited me to a meeting, you've asked me what I feel or what I think or what my perspective or ideas are, there's an element of entitlement that I need to step into. But I also need to realize that for a lot of us, that's not natural. A lot of us were socialized to head down, the work will razzle dazzle and show for itself. You should be grateful to be in that seat. You should be grateful they promoted you into that role. And then that keeps us in this teeny weeny little inside box, as opposed to saying, no, if I'm going to be a part of this team, I'm entitled to the same type of communication, the same type of support that everyone else in this organization, this team, this level of leadership is as well. Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me of a time I was working in a team. I was new into the role and it was a brand new role for me. So I went from working as a private practice lawyer to going in-house for the first time. And I've been in the role for 6 months, but I haven't had any proper feedback. And so when I went to the MD and was like, hey, can we have a conversation about how I'm doing? He's like, you're doing fine. Why do we need to have a meeting? I was like, should I just put that in your calendar? Put it in the calendar, schedule my meeting. He came into the meeting and was like, oh, Janine, why are we even having this meeting? I'm like, because I need feedback so that I know that I'm doing a good job. And if you say, yes, I'm doing a good job, I need the specifics around that because I want to know where I can improve. And as much as it was taking time out of his day, ultimately I was doing it to support the company. I want to do the best that I can do to impact the company. So if you view it less I'm making it about me and I want to take the time and look at the broader landscape, if you get the feedback, then you can improve. And if you can improve, it's going to be good for everybody. That's one way to look at it. And as you said, also you're entitled because you're in the role, right?
in the role. You hired me for a reason. I think sometimes we get in roles and we forget what we were hired for. The energy that we brought to the interview, the impact, the change, the skill, the expertise, we turn down the volume on it when we get into the role. And that can get us into some sticky situations that are difficult to navigate out of. But it's like, actually, I'm holding myself accountable to what I told you I'd deliver if you hired me in this role.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, I need to know how far off I am. I need to know how close I am. I need to know what you're seeing from your vantage point. Again, that's the beauty of having that leadership relationship. There are conversations you're not privy to, but you want to be able to plug in. You want to show them I'm a strategic member of the team. You're not just like paying me for the sake of paying me and saying hi to me in the mornings. Like, it's not that.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a question here from Dr. Michelle Rencher. She says, how do we gain comfort being entitled to disagree or even to gain feedback? What are your thoughts on gaining comfort around that?
I'm going to say it's less comfort because I'm going to be real. Every time I've disagreed with CEOs, heads of products. I've done it in front of everybody. I've done it privately. Everybody knows where Jaz stands. Never comfortable. I do it because it's anchored in the impact. It's anchored in why have I been invited into this room? What is my specific perspective? So anytime I say I disagree, I'm going to explain the reason why. And again, that's going back to the fact, going back to evidence. That again becomes what you stand for. So to a certain extent, you become a mouthpiece for the data that's showing that a particular initiative maybe needs to be readdressed. And it's the same thing with the feedback. I want to show up and be an impactful member of the team. To do that, I need the feedback. To do more of what's working, I need the feedback. To address what's maybe a challenge or needs readjusting or looking at, I need the feedback. It's always tying it back to the aims of the organization or even the person directly. I've had a very challenging conversation with a manager and it was a little bit exasperating, but I literally just said, I actually want to make you look good. Like, I legit want to make you look good as leader of this team. That's why I'm pushing so hard for this feedback. That's why I'm pushing so hard for your sign off on this particular project, because I believe it can get us the results. I know how it works. So as much as you might want to be as blunt as I was in needle and thread from like me to you to the company, but connect those dots back to why. Use the company values. A lot of the times explain, I understand our value is transparency, it's teamwork, it's whatever that kind of is. Sounds super cheesy, but they're there for a reason, right? They're again empowering you in a particular behavior. So tie it back to that, tie it back to the goals, tie it back to what you each committed to when you stepped in the role.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I would also add two things. One, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. The goal isn't necessarily to feel comfortable. It's recognizing that as you push yourself outside of your comfort zone, you will feel discomfort, but that's okay. And then the other thing is to recognize that everybody has different perspectives. And part of the reason why you have teams is that people will see the same thing differently. So if you have a perspective on something and you're not willing to share, you could potentially be holding back on your team where everyone else in the room wouldn't have seen it that way. But you seeing it that way could be like one golden nugget that shifts the perspective that makes everyone say, totally didn't think of that. Absolutely needed to think of that. Thank you so much. And so recognizing that we are, like Jaz said before, there for a reason. So bring your whole self and your whole mind and share your perspective and really address why do I feel reluctant? Am I scared I'm going to get it wrong? Do I think I'm going to get in trouble? Where the resistance is coming from, that's good to address too. Thank you for that question. That's awesome. Next thing, Jaz. So when you shared a few tips already in terms of what you can be doing, but what are some of the other things that we can be doing in terms of facing imposter syndrome? We recognize that most of us experience it. And we recognize that part of it is because of how we're socially engineered and what our environment is. But what are some of the things that we can proactively be doing, knowing that it's something that is likely to come up if it hasn't already or is going to come up again? What should we be thinking about?
So a lot of the things that we should be thinking about is actually starting to decode it. I think a lot of the times imposter syndrome is presented as this thing that we should get rid of, we should eradicate, like it's an illness. oh no, not that imposter syndrome thing again. And I get it, because it is a huge blocker to a lot of things within our careers, and it can get you stuck in the treacle, as I kind of described, right? It can stop you from showing up and progressing and all of those things. But what you want to really understand is ask yourself, what are the moments where I feel imposter syndrome the most? Because when it comes to you growing your career and ultimately stepping into new things that you've never done before, so even you described it, right, a completely new role, moving from where you were to actually essentially being client side, that looking different, there's an element of there's something new here. And yes, imposter syndrome can come in and overwhelm that experience, but in fact, you can reframe that, because the reality is if you weren't doing anything new, exciting, challenging, you wouldn't experience imposter syndrome. So in many ways, it's come to tell you something. In many ways, it can actually be anticipated. And in many ways, you can release yourself off the hook of it being something to fix, per se. Sometimes you feel like you're winging it because you are. And again, that becomes your choice to go and find the facts, to get the trainings, to plug the gap in your onboarding or enrollment or whatever that is. But there's a lot kind of in there that you can decode. The next thing is it can be moments like that when you're doing new stuff. But the next thing is ultimately to understand, when does this keep showing up? Imposter syndrome shows up in your career. We're going to talk about that context, but it can also show up in your life. I know people that feel huge imposter syndrome as a parent.
Oh, 100%.
Imposter syndrome don't care, okay? It is coming with you wherever you go. Why? Because the dynamics of you worrying about what you think other people think are there. When you are a parent, there is a child with some thoughts. When you are a parent, there's usually another parent with some thoughts. Heck, there's an entire family unit with some thoughts on how you're doing this parenthood journey. And I'm not even a parent, but I see that straight up, okay? So again, if it is in those moments, understand when it comes, what are those moments where it comes up? Also, what is the message? Because for some of us, it is, oh, you're going to get found out. For some of us, it's, you have 3 more steps to complete until you are certified as a parent or certified in your role, or you can own it in certain ways. What is the specific whisper, the negative, debilitating whisper that it brings to you? And understand, how can you decode that? So in coaching, we describe this as reframing, or you can describe it as self-coaching. How do I know this to be true? I'm going to look for the facts. I don't think that I'm as good as they think I am, right? That might actually be true. I'm going to be real with you. I've had moments where I've gone, you're expecting this, but I want you to know that this is the first time I've ever done this. And I've had similar experiences, but not the same. Imposter syndrome gone. Why? Because there is an equilibrium between what you expect and what I took control of that conversation. So again, once you get curious about your imposter syndrome experience, you can start to sort of break it apart like a bit of a puzzle piece. And in that sense, and that example, I used it as an opportunity to assert myself, to be entitled, like we spoke about before, and said, like, I'm entitled to let you know what to expect from me. We can have an open discussion about that, so that I never have to guess or make negative assumptions. And if I do, we're going to reset that with the facts. We're going to grab that thought and we're going to file that for our one-to-one, where we can kind of go, hey, what's your perspective here? The other thing that you can do that is less external facing, because sometimes I get it, sometimes we don't have those relationships that can help us hold up the mirror and reset. An exercise that I love doing is the I am exercise. Reaffirming who you are and what you're capable of can be a very, very powerful thing to do. And it's putting 30 seconds on the clock, starting every sentence with I am. Because we forget who we are. And yes, you're going to start off with stuff like, I'm a parent, I'm a friend, I am a person. You start off with stuff like that. But eventually what I want you to do, I want to challenge you to evolve into, I'm kind, I'm creative, I'm a problem solver, I'm solution oriented, I am calm in face of a challenge. Heck, I am frazzled in face of a challenge. I like peace, right? All of these things that you know to be true about yourself that nobody can take away, because that can empower you to bring the information to say, well, if all of this is true, I can connect that to why I am capable of doing this, why I'm competent in this, regardless of what anyone else may say or think. This is what I think about how I'm performing. This is how I analyze how I'm performing. So that can be a really, really big thing as well. And then the bit that's probably the biggest that I didn't even mention, I skipped over, recognize that it's imposter syndrome and say, hi, hello, I see you. Because what happens is imposter syndrome isolates you into thinking you are the only person on the planet. We started off this conversation by saying 75%. It is a lie, right? It will come and tell you, you are weird for this. You can't even, don't mention this to anybody because they won't know what it is and they don't know why you feel it and they'll just look at you like you're silly. All of that is a lie. Remove its power, its isolating power, by identifying, actually, I think that's what's going on here. And whether you feel comfortable to either have a conversation with your team, manager, a coach, a therapist, a partner, a best friend, yourself, say it out loud to release yourself from it being this very unique, niche experience that you have got because somehow you're broken in some way, shape or form. No, you're human. You have a mind like all of us.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And what I'm picking up with all of the things that you shared is the proactiveness, right? Of like you doing affirmations and being like, I am. And even just doing that is going to put you into a position where you feel more empowered to speak up. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also worth noting that when you take control of things in that way, the perception of you is absolutely going to change and it's going to shift. When you become the person that says, actually, you've given me this task, I'm happy to tackle it, but I know that I'm not fully equipped to do it. I might either need more training or I'm happy to give it a go and I'm going to need feedback, versus just taking it away, trying to do it and hoping for the best, that you've managed the expectation. So because you've managed the expectation, you're showing them that you're someone who's fully aware of themselves and someone who, even if you don't know how to do it, you're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's much more respected than if you're just cowering away in the corner and like hoping for the best and then not voicing your opinion. And I think that circles back to what you said before, like you're hired for a reason. Your skill set, your expertise is what they want to see. So you've got to like bring it to the fore.
You have to. And I think even with you saying like squirreling away, one of the biggest flags that you could be experiencing imposter syndrome is secret overtime. Stay with me. Most of us do overtime, right? At some point in our career, in some way, shape or form, right? It's something that we do at some stage. It does serve us in some moments and in other ways it does not. It does not when it's a secret, because when it's a secret, it could be fueled by imposter syndrome because nobody is allowed to find out that you cannot fit your work within your hours. But also, nobody is allowed to know that you're doing this extra work to quell the voice in your mind that it wasn't enough. It's 5:30 and it's not enough. And another thing, when we go into the 5 different personas that show up in imposter syndrome that were coined by Dr. Valerie Young, there's an element of perfectionism that goes into it. There's an element of, I'm going to say yes to all the things. That also then means you're the person that somebody goes, super tight deadline, I understand you're leading the project, let me know if you need any help. And you go, no, it's all fine. I'm fine. You message your partner or your housemate to say, I'm going to be home late because I'm just going to pull an all-nighter to get this done. So you've refused help because the shame. This is why we have a conversation about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is not inherently bad. The shame that comes with it is bad. That's the actual debilitating part underneath it. The shame can show up with a lot of stuff. Procrastination. Underneath it, shame. And what happens with the shame is I now need to start hiding. Because if it was a strategic overtime, you ain't got no problems with anybody knowing that you were online. You don't have any problems with people seeing you stayed up late to speak with the American team, or you got up early to speak with the Asia Pacific team, or whatever it is. Why? Because this is a very boundaried and or like assertive way of you managing your work, right? But if it's secret, A, it's uncontrolled. It can't be checked, i.e., nobody can go, hey, I noticed that you worked late. Don't forget, like, finish early on Friday or something like that. The checks and balances, you remove those. You even remove those from yourself, right? And that can be a huge, huge flag. So again, no problem with overtime. Do that. Do it in an empowered way. But if it is secret, I want you to ask yourself, why is it 9 o'clock and I'm still on this laptop? What specifically is going on that I'm masking ultimately? Why do I feel that I need to be online this late and do this many hours when my peers don't necessarily have to or feel that they have to? What's going on there?
Yeah, so good. And you touched on like the different personas. Do you want to just share, we won't dive into like all of the details of the 5 because we'll be here like all afternoon, but do you want to share what they are? I think I I got some of them too.
Yeah. I'll start off with the one that I relate to, which is actually the perfectionist, which is good fun. As we go through these, you might relate to several of them all at once or different ones in different scenarios. So I encourage you to think about that. But the perfectionist is the person where like missing the goal equals failure and shame. They were used to being the smart one, and then they kind of go into the work environment or any other environment, and it just never feels like it's good enough. So they do the secret overtime and stuff like that. So that's the perfectionist. Another person is the super. So it can be seen as like the superhuman or the superman, but I like super. So we don't need to be gendered here. This person says yes to absolutely everything. This is the person, especially when we talk about imposter syndrome in the personal life, there are no hobbies, there are no relationships, there are no passions, right? They are like one of 5 kids and they are always the one to do everything for the parents, right? And they say yes to absolutely everything and they're exhausted. But there's an element of it being performative, right? When you catch up with the super in your life and they go through the list of stuff that they do and you go, oh my gosh, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you juggle all of that. And although they are exhausted, inside they go, oh, you see me. Oh. So in a sense, they need the approval that this is the way to be. Another thing with the super, they're likely to tell you that they're a workaholic. Again, kind of similar to the secret overtime. If I tell you I'm a workaholic, you're never going to like check me for working too many hours. So I'm going to remove that power from you. Can't mirror that back to me because I told you I just love what I do. I love what I do. And then we've got the natural genius, similar to perfectionist, always told they were smart, but the bar is high, like 99 out of 100, failure. But also effort equals failure. And this one's really interesting because imposter syndrome can be connected to sort of mindset, so fixed and growth mindset. Growth mindset is essentially a belief that you can improve by effort. And fixed mindset is no matter what my efforts is, it is what it is. I'm never going to be able to do that thing. Never going to be good at that thing. It is what it is. So there's an element of kind of a little bit of an inherent fixed mindset here. Like if I didn't already know it out the gate, then I'm just never going to know it. Or if I realize I don't know it, my world falls apart. And this person will say no to an opportunity if it risks effort, if it risks elements of unknown. And then the last 2, we've got the expert. Do not call them that. They will literally kick you under the table or send you a private message on Teams or Zoom to say, why did you introduce me that way? But this can be the person, they have to check every single box. Yeah. They're always getting ready for a thing. You go, did you do that thing? Oh, no, but I found another course that I can do before. I found another qualification. There's another program that I'm going to go for before I apply for that next role that has basically been created for me. And then soloist. This is about it all being done by themselves. And here I definitely want to talk to, I've seen it in my clients in terms of social life, parenting, family life, never needs help, just always getting it done, right? We're all, I'm going to use the example of the one with 5 siblings, but you do everything for the parents. You're planning the parents' 60th birthday party and everyone wants to help and you said no to everybody. You've gone, I don't need anything. Meanwhile, you're melting down because you're just like, oh, I need to call caterer. I need to do this. I need to blow up the balloons. What time do we get the keys? All of this is happening and you're suffering in silence. But again, it's that shame that if I ask for help, that equals failure, which equals shame. They can all kind of lead to a specific flavor of failure, which ultimately leads to shame. But those are the 5 flavors.
So interesting. And what's the name of the doctor that like broke those down? So if you want to look
Dr. Valerie Young.
Dr. Valerie Young. So good. So good. And I think it is helpful to kind of look at that and really be able to identify where do you see yourself in that and how is it manifesting for you? Because the awareness piece is always the first step to figuring out, okay, if this is the awareness, which strategies are going to be most helpful for me to like keep this in check?
Yeah, huge.
There was a point here that Charmaine made. She says a couple of experiences she's had. One, sharing thoughts in meetings to be greeted with silence, and then sharing ideas for them to be dismissed only to be shared days later by the same colleague. Those behaviors can fuel imposter syndrome. So those are some, I guess, negative experiences that she's had that absolutely do cause us to experience imposter syndrome.
Oh, 100%. They can play into it. They build a little bit of a part of our evidence bank to what's going on here. And, you know, even with these points, so sharing the thoughts in the meetings to be greeted with silence, both of these, not that this is the blanket thing for everything, get another perspective. If you have a trusted person who is also in these rooms with you that can become an ally to see what's actually happening, you can't see the label from inside the jar. So there's an element of not only when you share thoughts in the meeting to be greeted with silence, they can show up as an ally to invite you to extrapolate, to, you know, go further on those thoughts, or indeed kind of give feedback on it to exemplify that you're not just sharing it for the sake of sharing it. But also in the second space, they can be a witness to go, yeah, that sounds nice, insert name of person stealing your great idea. Charmaine said that the other day as well. Perhaps this is something that you two can connect on. Right? So again, we've got that point, we've got that line in the sand that's like, this is still, the idea is still the idea, but I just want to attribute it back to Charmaine so that at the very least, we all can be witness to the fact that that link was there, regardless of whether you remember or not. I remember. And so that if this turns into a huge opportunity, Charmaine is not left out of the picture and being told, there's nothing worse than being told about a project that you came up with. People are like, we're releasing the blah, blah, blah. And it's like, the what? Right? So I empathize with you on these. And really, if you can find a trusted peer to go up with that, then definitely go for it. And then the flip side of that is that entitlement piece. What are your thoughts on what I've just shared? How do you think we could incorporate this in this going forward? So having those little sentence endings that are ultimately invitations to action from these people that let them know, no matter what, so I'm not sharing for the sake of sharing, and B, I'm being part of the active discussion. Same thing with the ideas being dismissed, shared later. I love a good question in those moments. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm really curious here because this is very similar, if not pretty much what I came to the table with last week. So I'm curious, what would you propose as the biggest difference? Because my suggestion was declined, or we decided it wasn't a good fit. So I want to just understand, maybe we're updating this idea here, right? Get that curiosity going, especially if it's the same room again, so that they don't run off and get lost in the source of this idea is amazing, but last week it wasn't, right? And we can also, again, have a proactive dialogue to make sure that you are part of that thing if it then goes further.
Yeah, and there's so much power in framing things as a question versus a statement. Because if you come off with like, well, I said that last week, it's kind of like, oh, here she goes, potentially, right? But if you ask it as a question, it's a genuine question, and it's going to invite them to either like reflect on it, that they have to address it, right?
100%.
Thank you for sharing that, Charmaine, because it is helpful to just highlight examples that many of us have experienced. And Jaz, those are great ways to kind of address those. I love it. So anything else that we need to think about or that you'd like to share before we wrap up? Because I feel like we've covered a lot, and I've got lots of thoughts that I can take away in terms of imposter syndrome, and absolutely know that it shows up in so many different areas of life. You mentioned parenting earlier. I'm like, absolutely, 100% all the time. And yeah, so I would love for you to wrap up with like any closing thoughts on it.
Yeah, I'd probably say my biggest thought is seek to build a relationship with the imposter syndrome, because it can then become a really big teacher. It can be a really affirming experience. It's not going to make it any easier. That is not the promise that I'm making here, but it will allow you to work with it and overcome it. I describe it as a person. I, in fact, encourage clients to name imposter syndrome, because what happens is you can sometimes see it coming off afar. You know what their hair's like, you know how tall they are. You can make out the image, right? They come in from afar. What I want you to move from is essentially having the person come in and just like sit on your shoulder for life with all the shame, with all that stuff. I want it to kind of be like, I see you coming, but there's no space for you here. However, you let me know what your message is, and we can have a conversation, but you're not moving in, right? You're not moving into my house, so to speak, because you're just going to come in and destroy it, right? That's the reality of it. So we really want to just build that relationship, understand the shape, the context, the environment, even phrases. For a lot of us, certain phrases or certain experiences can really, really heighten our experience of imposter syndrome. And when we start to decode that, then that's the beginning of it not being a blocker, and the beginning of it coming along, but leaving the shame behind.
Yeah, So good. So good. My last question. I always ask like people that I interview on the podcast if they have a favorite quote, saying, or mantra that they like to live by. Have you got one that you'd like to share? I put you on the spot now, so.
I know. This is a fairly recent one, and I kind of borrowed this from my coach, which is be where your feet are.
Ooh.
Be where your feet are. And it was something that she reflected back, because especially as somebody who identifies as ambitious, high achiever, I'm on to the next. We're sitting here speaking, I'm sitting in my office, but my brain is either on my honeymoon in Vietnam, it is either on the stage that I'm speaking at in a couple of weeks, it is inside a client session. Heck, it's at Christmas 2023. The mind could be elsewhere. We could be very split. And in that sense, it steals from us the full experience and the sense of presence, contentment, and peace with where we are. All those things are coming regardless. You don't need to stare at them. Like sometimes my partner will ask me, have you checked what time the bus is coming? And I'm just like, checking it won't change what time it arrives. I'm just going to go when I'm good and ready. So there's also an element of just anchoring that what's for me will be for me. What I'm experiencing now is worth me experiencing in HD, like in its fullness. So be where
my gosh. This is why I asked this question, because people will be dropping gems when it comes to sayings and quotes. And that is, that's profound. Be where your feet are. I love that. If people want to learn more about you, Jaz, and I know you have some resources around imposter syndrome, where do they go to find them?
Yeah, you can go onto my website, which is justjaz.co. If you go to /resources, you'll find the Imposter Syndrome Challenge. So that's 5 days of specific, practical things that you can do to build that relationship that I mentioned with your imposter syndrome. Outside of that, I am on LinkedIn, which is where we are here. I'm here all the time. My DMs are open. It is me. So I'd probably say those are the two main spaces that you can plug into resource.
Awesome. I'm just going to put your... I'm trying to. Okay, I'll do it afterwards. I was going to try and put your website in the comments. But thank you so much, Jaz. This has been awesome. If you are catching this on the replay and you have any questions, do post them, because we will circle back and just have a look and answer them. Yeah. I really appreciate you spending the time. This has been awesome. So thank you, Jaz.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And look forward to sharing with folks in the chat as well.
Yes. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you. I absolutely love hosting this podcast and talking about career-related topics that I think are going to support you in your career journey. A lot of the topics that we talk about are based on conversations that I have with clients or individuals that I speak to on a day-to-day basis. But I want to make sure that what we are sharing is absolutely tailored to you, our amazing listeners. So I'm going to be opening up some slots on my calendar so that I can have quick 15-minute conversations with you to learn more about where you're at in your journey and what types of topics you would like to hear more about. So if you are open to jumping on a call with me and having a quick discussion, I want you to head over to careerchangemakers.com/connect, and we can have a quick listener connection call. And in exchange for your time, you can pick my brains on your most pressing career development challenge. Okay, so head over to careerchangemakers.com/connect, and I look forward to having a quick coffee chat with you. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe to the show so that you don't miss any future episodes. Also, I would love to know what your biggest takeaway has been from today's episode. Come over and join us in our Career Changemakers community over on LinkedIn so that you can join the conversation there. Head over to lightbotscoaching.com/community and it will take you right to the group. I look forward to seeing you.